Welcome to Pendant and Ring. This is part 4 of an audiobook series from The Lives of Tudor and Stuart Princesses by Agnes Strickland. Henry VIII received, when at Tournai in the summer of 1513, a visit from the young Archduke Charles of Castile or Austria, who came accompanied by his aunt Margaret of Austria, the Dowager of Savoy and Regent of the Netherlands, for the purpose of congratulating him on the fall of that city, taken from their mutual enemy, the King of France. The Duchess of Savoy seemed captivated by the appearance and fame of Charles Brandon, who had recently made a dashing sortie almost to Paris gates, and was deemed the hero of the day by his own countrymen and their allies. Henry VIII was infinitely amused by promoting a love-making scene when they met at Lisle between his favorite and the fair regent. Exulting in his own command of languages, he acted as interpreter between the Duchess Regent and Brandon, greatly delighting in the blunders she made in English. As for the handsome favorite, he could have conquered Paris sooner than have wooed the daughter of the Caesars in any language she could understand. The king made Brandon kneel before her. He drew from her hand a ring, as if in betrothal, giving her in exchange one of great value, but Margaret replied that Brandon was no mate for her, and as the ring taken was her official signet, she must have it restored. The following spring, the king, the Princess Mary, the Duchess Margaret, the Archduke Charles, and Brandon were all to meet at Calais for the purpose of concluding the long-negotiated marriage between the princess and the Archduke. But the ever-recurring wrangle respecting the diamond fleur-de-lis of the men of Ghent prevented it from taking place. At last, by the diplomatic tricks of her brother, the fair Mary was left utterly penniless. The Council of Flanders declared they would gladly receive her to be espoused to their prince, for they knew she was one of the fairest ladies in the world, but as concerning the articles of her dower, they could not fulfill it without the consent of Ferdinand, King of Aragon, who was minded to marry the Prince of Castile in Spain. Henry would not marry his sister without a settlement or dower being secured to her, and that the Flemish statesman would not give without her portion, and thus Mary, in the commencement of the year 1514, was repudiated, although she had for some years assumed the title of Princess of Castile. While thus situated, the grandest alliance the world could offer was proposed to the Lady Mary. The Duke of Longueville, a French prince of the blood, then a prisoner in England, being captured in the skirmish called the Battle of the Spurs, pointed out to Catherine of Aragon that their fair young sister-in-law would make an admirable Queen of France. Louis XII had been recently left a most disconsolate widower by the decease of his queen, Anne, Duchess of Bretagne, yet was in great haste to marry, as he was aged and had no heirs. The negotiation was carried on with rapidity by Queen Catherine and her illustrious prisoner, who had obtained the cooperation of Jane Popincourt, the favorite lady of the young princess. The result was that whatsoever manifestation of attachment might have existed between the Princess Mary Tudor and Charles Brandon in the course of the year 1514 was crushed under the intelligence that she must yield her hand to the infirm and homely Louis XII, King of France, whose character and disposition, although excellent, were not likely to outweigh the difference of his 60 years in the estimation of a girl of 16. No resistance she could make altered her destiny in the least, for Henry VIII had ingeniously arranged a method reconciling at the same time his retention of the glittering Flemish pawn by promising her a splendid dower. Henry had waged a war against the King of France on the pretext of forcing him to pay up the tribute of a yearly annuity with which Louis XI had bought off the unwelcome visitation of Edward IV at the head of 50,000 English yeomen. 1,000,000 crowns were demanded by Henry VIII. Out of this debt, Louis XII agreed that 200,000 should be deducted and allowed, as if Henry had paid down the same sum actually left by Henry VII as his youngest daughter's portion. Thus, the diamond fleur-de-lis remained clear gain in the jewelry box of the English king. The bride, meantime, was to be jointured as splendidly as any queen of France, even equally to her predecessor, Anne of Bretagne, a sovereign in her own right. A lively discussion took place between Henry VIII and his young sister before she could be induced to accept this capital bargain and her ancient suitor. They came, however, to a compromise by which the king engaged that, If his sister submitted quietly to be the pledge of peace between England and France on this occasion, she should please herself in the choice of a spouse the next time she bestowed her hand. Henry pacified the princess as crying children are soothed by their nurses with extravagant promises if they will take physic, in hopes they will forget all that was said. But young Mary clung to the promise with Tudor tenacity and took the first opportunity of acting on the same. The Duc de Longueville, when he returned to his own country, had undertaken to make a request to his king that when the princess became Queen of France, Jane Popincourt might be retained in her service, because she was of all ladies the most trusted and beloved by her. Louis XII was a good-natured man, but at the same time an old politician. He forthwith discussed this request for the beloved Jane Popincourt with Charles Somers, the Earl of Worcester, one of the ministers of Henry VIII, the ambassador appointed to conclude the matrimonial treaty. The condition of Jane Popincourt's companionship is doubtless alluded to in the following letter of young Mary to her aged spouse, extant in the French archives, which was evidently presented by the Earl of Worcester to the King of France before the Financial, as the epistle expressly intimates. I humbly commend myself to your good grace. As the king, my lord and brother, is sending ambassadors to you directly, I have desired, entreated, and commissioned my cousin, the Earl of Worcester, Charles Somerset, to tell you some matters from me regarding the espousals now spoken of between you and me. Honor and credit him, monsieur, as myself. And certes, monsieur, I have previously notified to you by our cousin the Duke of Longueville that thing which at present I most desire and wish is to hear happy tidings of your health and good prosperity, as my cousin of Worcester will tell you at large. Please you, moreover, monsieur, to use and command me according to your good pleasure, that I may obey and please you by the help of God, who give you, monsieur, good life and long, by the hand of your very humble companion, Mary. There were, as will soon appear, some very serious objections to the residence of Jane Popincourt in France as one of the young Queen's ladies, although there had been none in regard to her first suggestion of the marriage to the prisoner of war Longueville, with whom, it is to be feared, Jane's reputation was somehow compromised, for Worcester owned afterward that he was startled when the King of France mentioned her to him, but promised to report the request to his master, Henry VIII. The young princess was, however, suffered to suppose that all her stipulations would be observed, and all the promises made to induce her obedience would be held sacred. She therefore gave her hand quintessentially to the Duke of Longueville as the proxy for his king, the marriage of procuration taking place at the Greyfriars Church near Greenwich Palace, August 25, 1514. Soon afterward, the princess was induced to write the following letter to her unseen spouse, in which she already speaks of herself as his wife. The original is in French. Monsieur, I commend myself most humbly to your grace. I have received by Monsieur the Bishop of Lincoln the very affectionate letters you have written me with your own hand, and they have given me infinite joy and comfort. Assure yourself, monsieur, that nothing equals my desire to see you, and the king my brother uses great diligence to speed my passage across the sea, which I hope, by the pleasure of God, will be brief. Meanwhile, I supplicate that you will afford me the inestimable consolation of often hearing news of your health and happiness. May the aid of our Creator, monsieur, grant you a long and prosperous life, from the hand of your very humble consort, Marie. Thank you for joining us today. Subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Pendant and Ring.